Hey guys, One Clue here. I hope all of you are doing really well and having a really great day. In today's video, I do have a special guest with me. We do have a couple of interesting topics that we want to talk today about. But the first thing I want to do is to quickly introduce myself, who I am, what I do, and why are we even here. So I'm One Clue, and I do host this YouTube channel. I studied business computer science. Yeah, what I do regularly is I do educate people on YouTube and in some of my workshops that I do on how to use Bitcoin hardware, how to use Bitcoin software. And yeah, I just teach people, and I do think this is a lovely thing to do, and that's what I do daily. Yeah, and I brought a special guest with me, and I think I give the word to you that you can introduce yourself.
All right, so I'm Jonathan, CEO and founder of Decentral. We started the 6th of October 2016, so it's been a while now. Obviously, the company went through a lot of evolution from its original intention and service. So we do a lot of different branches of service based on Bitcoin. I think the one we'll be touching more in this video will be the mining hosting, but let it be known we do also many mining ASIC repair. We recently, with the crew of Open Source Miners United, we do manufacture some open source miners and distribute them. We have the hosting, we have consultation as well. So there's a lot of different scenarios. Just to give a quick tour of what it can be anything from helping businesses starting their own mining operations. It can be crazy projects like dual purpose mining and trying to grow food from the mining heat. So there's a lot of all that going on at Decentral. But yeah, I think we'll touch more on the mining hosting today. So I'll uh, give the speech back to you.
Thanks, that's lovely. And you already spoke about something that's really interesting. So you are obviously also a part of OSMU. So OSMU is the Community Open Source Miners United. And we, because I am always obviously also a part of OSMU, we are a community that love to educate and to think about Bitcoin and what's possible with it. And today we thought about it. It might be cool to talk to someone, and lovely that you are one of our members in the OSMU community that is actually hosting Bitcoin mining. And we want to touch on this because we do have a couple of questions, and I think it's just a opportunity to have you here and ask you those questions. And yeah, I'd say let's see what you will answer to us there. So let's
Amazing.
take a look on the first question that I do have. And the first one is, could you describe the current standards in the Bitcoin mining operations that are hosting providers in?
Yeah, so they obviously differ from region to region, right? So I'm more familiar with the regulations here in Quebec, but we also operate more generally in Canada as well. The regulations are still very, lax. I would say they're still catching on, right? They're still learning. So there's a lot of that going on. You can feel that. I'd say more on the tax side, they're like looking at how to exactly treat the revenue, the capital gains, stuff like that. So it's more like an accounting game that you'll have on that front. And obviously, there's also some regulations around what's scammy or not. So here in Quebec, we do have the Autorité des marchés financiers that statute in 2018, I believe, that ICOs and services like cloud mining are essentially scams, are frauds. So they are not permitted. So I could not offer you an ICO, or I could not offer you cloud mining, and I do not intend to anyways. So that
Okay,
law
can
doesn't
can
bother me.
we can we dive into this? Because I think the audience currently is a little bit familiar of what hosting could be. We do
Mhm.
know, okay, I do have my mining device at your location, and you provide me the power, and I just mine to the pool, hopefully, whatever I do select. But let's dive into cloud mining. Can you just quickly explain what cloud mining in it is and why you said it's a scam?
Yeah, you're 100% correct. It's sometimes we take that for granted. So we have the physical mining, right? Would be you doing yourself. You have your own machine. You have your own infrastructure. When you're doing hosting with Decentral, for instance, you're going to be using our infrastructure, but with your own machines. So what we're doing is more like a renting relationship. When
Hmm.
you go for cloud mining, it's really like you're renting hash rate. So you don't own the infrastructure, you don't own the machine. So essentially, you're just renting, and you're renting. Normally, they'll offer that as a fixed hash rate. So for instance, let's just say an arbitrary number, you can rent 10 terahashes. So you're going to rent that, you're going to have a contract, and you're going to have to pay for that contract every month that goes. But thing is that how mining is designed and how it evolves, and we'll touch on that a bit later with the energy efficiency and everything. 10 terashes over time just essentially vanishes, right? So the way it's designed is really that only the owners will make a profit on it. And I've never seen one case where cloud mining could be profitable for their customers.
Interesting. All right. So we kind of dived a little bit into the first standards, and we obviously noticed, okay, standards are mostly different. So you do have a couple of regulations on your part in Quebec, and are there any other standards that you can relate to? Like, let's say, okay, one standard is you need a big warehouse with at least 20,000 Bitcoin miners, or is there anything other than just regulations? What would you describe as standards in the Bitcoin mining industry?
Mhm. So the standards, I would say, so you have the standard for a small scale mining facility. I'd say anything under 100 units is, is going to be like 100, under 500 kilowatts. So it's not half a megawatt, let's say. When you're starting to have more than 1 megawatt, it's still relatively small in the space, but you have more responsibilities, right? You still have 1 megawatt. It represents a lot on the grid. So, for instance, here in Quebec, one thing we have to do is we have. I'm looking for the English word. Call that délestage in French. It's curtailment. Curtailment. So
Hmm.
so you do have some social responsibilities, and some of them are state enforced. Some of them you'll try to take them on your own. So, for instance, I'm thinking of noise. So you do have some of those mining institutional miners that are set up here in Quebec. Some of them had issues with local communities for the sound it would generate. So they had to, they want to invest in a solution for that sound. So they had like noise dampening walls, and they'll do
Mm-hmm.
that because they want to keep those communities happy. Obviously, you don't want to have complaints over you. So there's a social responsibility that comes with the industry and what we're doing. And I think all of this is all taking place a bit as we move forward. So there's no like real actual standard yet. It's all being a bit drawn. So really it's just about being a good neighbor like any business, and looking at the externalities we have and try to minimize all negative externalities we have on the communities.
So you could comprehend this as something like, usually you can do whatever you want when we're talking about Bitcoin mining, but you should stick to the regulations in your current yeah, registration.
Jurisdiction, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
All right. And let's move on a little bit. So have you seen, despite from probably more and more regulations, have you seen any standards evolving or anything evolving in the recent years? Like what kind of impacts did you see on the recent years as a hosting
So
provider, obviously?
yeah, so obviously you have lately there was the IEC, I believe, in the United States, which is the one of the regulatory arm from the US that's looking to make a survey about the electricity usage. I believe that was fought in court and was like, for instance, for now it's put on hold, but it could really. It could come back, and I guess with those surveys, they want to try to see what are the choke points. So there is some future danger that is perceived from that we have to stay aware of. There's the Europe, I believe, that's statute negatively on proof of work mining, especially. So I'm not sure exactly because I'm not really involved in European mining, but I believe it's some pain in the ass there. And there's also the obviously well-known China mining ban that occurred in 2020. We know, like, obviously there's still a lot of mining going on in China. There's a lot of layers of government in China, and a lot of those like lower layers, like at the city level, they're very corrupted. So there's a lot of cities that, for what I know, that in China, some of their energy distributors rely on the revenue from mining. So it's not as easy as just the government says, we ban it and it's all done. There's even layers within the government in China that needs mining. So it's an
Interesting.
interesting dynamic. Yeah.
Yeah, all right. So we do see a shift to like in the same as like of the first question, like regulations do tend to change
Yeah.
and maybe increase, especially like you noticed earlier the noise level that you need to keep below of, or any other ones. So we do see there is this stiff sticking to those regulations. All right. So I'd say let's dive into another topic for now, and this is the energy efficiency topic. I'm really interested or keen into what are use strategies to enhance efficient mining.
Yeah. So back in the days, we had the SSH access to our machines. I'm talking mostly, referring mostly to the Ant miners, which is the 70% of the hardware distributed on the network. So the Ant miner first, we would SSH into the unit, and we could play with some values like the voltage and frequency, and get some efficiency gains from that. Eventually came custom firmwares, and even now custom control boards. So there's a lot of customization that can go on from your hardware, but you'll notice that normally Bitmain is not the only one. Most manufacturer, they'll keep the stock system very closed, and they don't want to share those details. They want you to play too much with those values. So there's a lot of hardware that has a very good potential. Let's think of the Antminer S17, which
Hmm.
has some flaws, but when it's properly attended to, it can be a very good machine, very efficient. Running a S17, at 1000 watt, it can be as efficient as running a S19. So
Interesting.
like there are a lot of um, games that can be played with your hardware, but you need to go out of you need to jailbreak your device essentially, to be able to play with those settings.
So it's obviously always like a some sort of a trade-off. You need to figure out what kind of settings may I need to change, and what kind of control boards I may need to use in order to be efficient enough to keep my operation running. So that's
Absolutely.
that's really interesting, and this kind of also brings me to my next question, because I want to ask you, like, how do you keep the balance between this trade-off between like operational costs and on the other hand the environmental sustainability? Because you obviously want to make a buck of it. How do you keep that balance?
Yeah. So, like you mentioned, essentially one of the major driving costs for mining is the electricity, right? So you want to be as efficient as possible. It's just the name of the game, and you want to do that for as low as possible. So when you have older generation units for a miner at my scale that doesn't have shareholders to impress or nothing, the goal is to make a good return over investment on your hardware, not necessarily to have impressive numbers about the amount of Bitcoin mines or stuff like that. So you'll focus on getting the best bang for the buck. Just going back to that example I gave previously, if I can get two Antminer 17 for half the price I would get Antminer S19, and I can set them to have the same efficiency, well then I'm able to make a return over invest over my S17s much faster this way, and I can use some of that capital maybe to go and do some other things. Now, for sustainability, well, here in Quebec, we're 100% hydropowered from
Mhm.
Hydro-Quebec. And in Alberta, well, there's going to be some, so you can see some creativity that's starting to show. So we're,
So this is another location that you use
yes,
for hosting, right?
so we have Quebec, which is a state from Canada, and we have Alberta, which is another state in the west of Canada. It's famously no, it's essentially our Texas, right? It's our version
Hmm.
of Texas. So it's the state where there's the most energy. There's a lot of surplus there. There's a lot of gas operations as well, gas wells, and we know that most of these gas wells they have like stranded gas issues. They can have methane issues, and these are all like issues that are at least seen as very pressing issues, and it's where Bitcoin miners can be very creative, and we can turn those negative externalities into positive ones. So, for instance, using Bitcoin miners to go and capture the methane or to go and capture those the stranded gas that would be otherwise flared and would result in more harmful gases in the atmosphere. So, we're actually able to diminish the amount of negative gases in the atmosphere this way, and it's a way also to what I call to do dual purpose mining, and is something I think we'll see more and more, is to be able to capture value from mining, but by more than one angle. So just not just by the mining angle, but in this case also by the mitigation angle.
Oh, that's quite interesting. All right. So I think there's nothing more to add on this side,
I
but
think.
I'd love to hop over to the next question because we do have a couple ones that we need to talk about because we want to get as much information out of you as possible. So let's dive into the section of security and security measures, especially.
Mhm. Yeah.
So we all know like those mining machines are obviously expensive, and in a mining facility, you have plenty of those expensive devices. How do you protect your mining infrastructure and especially digital assets in this way?
Yeah. So without going over details, what I will say is over that now 8 years of experience we have in Bitcoin mining, there was in one instance where we got robbed, where we got some theft. So again, I won't go over the details, but just to say that we're very aware that this is a risk, and I'm bringing awareness to all the other operators that this is a real, absolute possibility, and you have to be very careful at and you know it's coming from a guy that's already taking a lot of security measures, so now we've just doubled down and we're in full paranoid mode. So we do there's a lot of physical security you want to put in place. You want to make it as expensive and as complicated as possible to come and hit you. You want to also have redundancy, so you, like more than one security system is definitely key. And ideally, if you spread them, if you don't centralize all your for instance network equipment or security equipment, and they're spread over the place, can make it much more difficult to how to say alter one or the other. You want to go, well, fences for the hosting location. So we have our office location, which is disclosed, but the actual hosting locations we do not disclose, so we don't give the address. And this is a turn off for some customers. There are some customers, and I understand, some customers will say, I want to know where my machines will be hosted. But for us, it's too much of a security issue, and we don't share that location. So it's
I think
if
that's
it's a deal
understandable.
breaker, yeah, if it's a deal breaker, we rather lose the business than take a risk.
Uh,
And we also have patrol, because obviously we at our scale we cannot be on site 24/7. So we'll have patrols that will randomly go on the hours we're not covering.
I mean, you could say it like the other way around. If whenever something could go wrong or would go wrong with your hosting providing service, then at least we do know where your company is sitting, and we can wait there with our forks and our
Yeah.
torches and
Yeah, this is
yeah,
actually where I'm at almost all
yeah.
of the time, is the office. So if you want to come with the fork and everything, you come to the
Just
office.
joking here around.
Yeah,
All right,
yeah.
but that's pretty interesting, and I do think it's like a good explanation of like you need to tinker a little bit about the security because, as you said, like you're over 8 years in this business right now, and you only had one major issue there,
Hmm.
and that's a positive for you because it was only once. Usually, or hopefully, it will never happen, but it could happen from time to time.
Statistically, it can always happen.
Statistically, yeah, statistically,
But
whenever you work with humans, all right.
yeah. So that's what it is just to take that experience and learn from it and grow from it, and that's what I think we did. And I think we did it graciously, and nobody suffered a loss. No, none of my customers suffered a loss. we
That's
we
good.
got all of our customers back, and so that's something I can pride myself with. And yeah, moving forward.
That's a good thing. Okay, let's go ahead and let's talk about a little bit of what we already dived into, kind of those regulatory compliances.
Mhm.
So we always obviously already spoke about some regulations that you do have, but are there any requirements, like from the regulation
Mhm.
point of view, that you need to provide as an operator of mining hosting?
Yeah. So again, going to the regulatory landscape, I think is more on the energy like more on the energy side where it will be played. So here in Quebec, it's something we've experienced and I know well. So from 2018, there was a mining moratorium put in place from the previous energy minister, Pierre Moreau. That was made after request from the only essentially energy distributor in Quebec, which is state owned. It's Hydro Quebec. So they received so much demand. Like back in that time, they received 20,000 megawatts of demand, just in demands. The thing
That's
is,
insane.
though, like a lot of those demand, I think were, how to say, a bit artificial in the sense that, you just had to go and fill a form online. So it was too easy. There was like no actual way to sort out the serious projects from the just, clown projects.
Hmm.
And but they use that figure to bring that law upon us. So when all of the dust settled, we were up to 660 megawatts in Quebec, and now it's capped there, and it's kept at that cap for now until there's like more either more debates or more energy. So right now, uh, here in Quebec, like almost everywhere in the world, we're talking more about conserving energy than creating new projects. It's something, if you want to touch on, I can definitely give my input on that. But obviously, it's playing against us in the context of mining.
It's interesting. So you already earlier spoke about that you are in this business for over 8 years, and also that you do have two different mining locations. So this brings me to another question that I do have. So you have the experience over the years, but what is your personal experience with like navigating through the landscape of those
Mhm.
different jurisdictions?
Yeah, so jurisdictions, we do have a few. Again, just going quick back to Quebec, where we were more involved. We presented ourselves, and we have documentations and everything, reports that we've brought to Régie de l'Énergie, which is the reglementary arm of the government that oversees Hydro Quebec for the electricity prices and stuff like
Hmm.
that. And so we really made the case for mining, and we tried to explain concepts like grid stabilization and stuff like that. I think there's a lot of education to be done, because if they would see it the way we see it, I think it's not. And I'm just not just saying that because I'm part of the industry, but really from my point of view, like there's an issue with energy all over the world, and I really think that mining, ironically, fixes that issue by stabilize, because it's since it's a customer of last resort, you always have miners that are going to be wanting to buy that energy. So you have a baseline, and one of the biggest hurdles we have to adopt renewables is to have a baseline, and now we have it because of mining. So I think like it's such a great solution. And I think I went a bit over what you were saying. So jurisdiction experience, we did navigate a bit. So we went and helped another facility start in Texas and start the repair facility as well. We operate now, as you know, in Alberta. We're operating more with methane mitigation and stranded gas. We're not the oil and gas authority, though. We have a partner that's over there that has this authority. So we're the mining side of it, and they're the oil and gas side of it, because that's a whole other world. So they will go through all those different hoops, because there's a lot of different regulation, for instance, in Alberta, that we don't have to look for here in Quebec or whenever you connect to the grid. So a lot of the wells in Alberta, they're going to be private, so all that dynamic already on its own is very different. But then if you want to go and drill, or if you want to go and consume, or whatever it is, you still have to fill all those paper and make it approved by the state and everything. So there's a lot of that kind of stuff going on. But again, it's always almost energy related more than really mining related. It's not necessarily targeted at mining, it's targeted at like large consumers.
I do see. So there are plenty of partners that are playing together into this key role of
Yeah,
using energy or producing energy and so on.
yeah,
So a ton of regulations and a ton of paperwork, probably,
unfortunately.
unfortunately. All right. So I think this covers this topic greatly. So let's move into the deep dive of technology advancements. Do you see any kind of evolution besides newer ASIC chips that are coming out that are way more efficient? But do you see any other like advancements or evolutions in the mining hosting service in particular?
Yeah, so well, just like I was saying just before, I'm going to be a bit repetitive sometimes, but that dual purpose mining is really where my mind is at. That's where me personally I'm positioning myself. I think mining, first of all, like mining from the grid, I think it makes sense whenever we can bring more value to the grid. So grid stabilization, like I just said, would be amazing, and for that to be really relevant, is not to go and consume like energy that's already on the grid. Is really to stimulate the production of new renewables. That would be a massive ambition and massive realization for me, is to be able to you know make that value perceived by the different states, and make them understand that there's an actual way. Here in Quebec, again, we're 100% hydro, right? So it's not too much of an issue, the renewables. It's not part too much of the public discourse. But over Canada, though, there's more, there's less renewables. So if you want the renewables to penetrate the market, well, then you need to make them. In my mind, you need to make them economically feasible. Just don't make some laws or carbon taxes and stuff like that, like we're doing. That's just penalizing and removing value from the economy and from the entrepreneurs. I think we have to go and aim for adding value and creating value. So yeah, dual purpose mining with the grid. I would go grid stabilization. When we go over for oil and gas, like we touched, methane mitigation, stranded gas, and where we're going, in our houses with the plebs, and we want to stimulate more decentralization, well, then you can look into reusing that heat. So you can have like Bitcoin space heaters. It's something that I guess you and your audience will know well. We've focused a lot on that, and it's been doing very good. I think it's very popular and a lot. There's one person that did a review lately on our page, and it was one of the best reviews I've seen because it's not a Bitcoiner. And somebody that actually had his friend tell him that he could be making revenue instead of just having an expense for his heat. And he's bought one of the Endminer S9 Space Heater edition we did, and he's run it this winter. And he decided to write to us and tell us. And now I guess he's a Bitcoiner now. So
That's lovely.
yeah, and then again for ETH, even those large institutional players, like Marathon, for the best or worst, they're investing a lot in that. So you can see one of their latest announcement was to reuse the ETH for like doing those large fish tanks. And so you can see that even in the agriculture in general, there can be a big synergy. I know here we looked at one point, it didn't land, but we looked into distilleries as well.
Hmm.
So there's so many ways to create more value from our activities.
That's lovely. I mean, I do get a point. So now it's not about like, okay, we want to use the energy. Now we want to give something back to not only using it, but now we use it for something that's not only profitable, but it's also giving back to the environment or anything else. Like for example, as you said, like otherwise gases would be spread out in the atmosphere, and now we do reuse them. That's
Yeah.
just brilliant. And this also brings me like to something that I'm curious about. How did you get in this? How do you adopt to such new thinking, I'd say, of mining operations?
So really, mining on its own is just staying ahead of the curve, I think. And it's what I say. Mining is co-opetition, right? Is the
Hmm.
perfect co-opetition. So we all collaborate, but we're all also in like the most brutal competition there is on Earth. I think there's nothing as hard as mining as a business because it's always on the edge. You always have to improve, and there's always diminishing returns because of the difficulty adjustment. So the only way to there are some ways, right, to beat the difficulty adjustment. And most public companies, what they'll opt for is raise capital and plug more. So if you outpace the mining difficulty, then you can grow your revenue. So that's one way. But at some point, I believe the music stops. And so there has to be some other ways where you're able to go and increase your margins in a context of diminishing returns. And I think again, it's going back to that dual purpose. So it's just a realization. You come to make those advancements by dealing in the business, by running your numbers, running your estimates, knowing your stuff, and eventually you realize that like the only way is either I plug more machines infinitely, or there are some other ways to extract value from that.
That's quite interesting because you now spoke about this topic that there's this sort of some companies that are raising capital just to try to stay ahead of the curve with just buying new hardware over and over
Yeah.
again, and that's their own business model. Like, okay, we promise to the investors that we do more because we buy more. It kind of sounds stupid, but it is at some companies the way to go, I believe. So let's dive a little bit into this section of it. So let's talk a little bit about cost structure and pricing. So what could you expect as someone who never heard about hosting or hosting Bitcoin mining or any other cryptocurrency? What kind of structural costs are we talking about, and what other factors are playing into the contribution of pricing models, especially for
Mhm.
clients? Because we obviously do know, okay, you do get from your power company a price point, but for the power that you want to use, that you then want to bring to your customers, but what else plays into this game?
Mhm. It's probably the most complicated question you're gonna ask for this whole talk, and I mean we could probably do an episode just on that. So so first of all, whenever you want to have infrastructure and be a serious hoster, you're gonna have massive capital expenditure, and so this is where, like, as a small player like I am, I believe I'm a small player, relatively to the others, like it asked to raise so much, and you don't have access to funding, you don't have access to financing. Like I don't have a margin, I don't have anything like that. The bank essentially don't trust us with nothing. So there's that part. Infrastructure is going to be massive, so obviously when you're doing hosting, like the hoster is going to get his margin from that, all that trouble and that events in there. But interesting dynamics, since we touched on the institutional miners as well. There are so, and you can go and look at their numbers, but you have that electricity price, right? And before we even go over all of that, electricity, just because sometimes it can be confusing, most of the time you're going to have the kilowatts per hour rate, but there's also a base rate that most people don't take into account. And so there's here we call it the appellation. So that would be the power drawn rate. So power
Mm.
drawn rate would be like, for instance, if you hit 1 megawatt in a month. Let's just use my case, for instance. I have 1 megawatt in 1 month. So if I hit that, I have a power drawn rate for that 1 megawatt. And then I have also a rate for each kilowatt hours I'm using. So let's say
Interesting.
I hit 1 megawatt and then I shut down and don't mine over the rest of the month. Like I just do it 1 hour and then I shut down. I still have to pay that power drawn rate of 1 megawatt. So there's a massive baseline. And so this acts like a motivator for miners to stay plugged in, right? Because you want to lower your unit rate for hosting. So you can't just go and power on and off based on how the market is doing and how you're feeling. You really have to commit to your mining. So there's not only massive capital expenditure, but there's also massive commitment. Normally you have enormous deposits also with the energy providers, which is our case. So all of that is very heavy. Now going back to comparison between mining, hosting, and the public institutions. So yes, you do have the electricity price. In the case of hosting, so you host with Decentral, for instance, you'll have your electricity, you have the spot, the infrastructure, everything, the service, the internet, the security. So all that stuff is bundled into one price that you get to pay. In our case, it's a fixed price. It's $75 Canadian per kilowatts. So it's simple in our case. Some others will do model per kilowatt hours. That doesn't matter too much. It always leads to the same rates essentially. And sometimes these obviously can be a bit higher, right? We have our margin, everything. But what's super interesting is owning public coal stocks might be more profitable because of the swings and everything. But I suspect this will change over time, because if you look at their actual expenditures, yes, they have cheaper energy than us because they consume so much, but they have so much fees in the administration. My administration costs nothing, or close to nothing, right? So it's very funny, because if you take all the costs together, you can see that most like small to medium mining companies I know actually have better they have better numbers than public mining companies. So like the popular belief that you have to hit that massive scale to be profitable, I think is untrue.
Okay.
And you can verify those numbers, they are public. And I think the reason why they're doing so well right now is because they're able to raise capital and always outpace the mining difficulty, and so it looks like they're doing good, but they're not, doing that good. And eventually, the music stopped, like it did in 2022, right? The bear market definitely brought some miners to their knees, and here in Quebec, I saw some of those public mining companies, selling their facilities. So there's a lot of
Mm.
facilities changing hands right now.
Okay, that's interesting because I do think like it, obviously this is no speculation and no market return or anything about marketing prices here, but obviously we do have, or we tend to do have, a couple of different market behaviors, as said, like bull or bear market. And I do think that in the future we will see something like this again. Like it seems to be that some people didn't learn
Mm.
from
Yeah.
the old days.
Yeah, it's like unfortunately it's the way it's the way it is, and there's some economic theories that says with a free market you get more of these swings, more volatility, and it's possible it's just the way Bitcoin always evolves through those different cycles, and but yeah, you can see that most of the time when something performs like Bitcoin, people will get leverage, and when there's too much leverage, at some point it breaks, and then people can pay their leverage, and it all falls down.
That's a good point because what I'm now interested in is like we spoke about it, or we at least talked about it in one sentence, that the price point, and this is the driving factor of Bitcoin, is changing from time to time. So how do you compensate those fluctuations, or is this fluctuation in the price of Bitcoin anything that impacts your business model and the service that you offer to your clients?
Yeah. So, for instance, in 2022, ASIC repair was just disastrous. So it went like from fixing hundreds and hundreds of units a month to like getting dry very, very quick. So that was hard. We had to reduce the team. So a lot of learning there. It's my, Decentral is my first business. So um, going through that kind of phase for the business is definitely a learning on its own. But again, we did that. So ASIC repairs, ASIC hosting were positioned in a unique way, and I think we're positioned much more unique than most of the providers, where we serve mostly the plebs. It's always been, and it will always be. And now I've made my mind definitely on that. It's not just ideological stance; it's also economical stance. Because what I came to realize is that all my small customers that have 1 to 10 units, they're all still here. They don't depend on the mining revenue. Those large mining institutions, they all depend on the mining revenues. But when you have somebody that uses it as a passive income, like they have their day job and everything, they don't care if Bitcoin fluctuates. So if you have those customers, if you have the committed customers that don't care about that stuff, well, then you're in no trouble. So I like my hosting, like it didn't move at all. But the ASIC repair, that was very, very hurtful, and it
Interesting.
makes sense because it's so much linked to the Bitcoin price, and a lot of the repairs we had were coming from large customers, and all the large customers are mining revenue dependent, so they're the first to give up.
Interesting. So this also brings me to the next question that I do have, because you spoke about this giving up or at least changing the behavior depending on the price point. So what are the biggest challenges that you do face as a mining hosting provider today?
Yeah. So again, the way I am positioned, I won't feel too much like the price is not an issue for me, because because it's not an issue for my customers. So the way I've positioned myself is to have customers for whom the Bitcoin mining price fluctuation doesn't matter. Now, aside of that, we also we're diversified. So we have uh, all the manufacturing, for instance, that are going now with the Bitaxe. So this is one source of revenue that even like right now, obviously the rates are doing much better, so it's like having wind on your back. But even when the market was still not quite recovered, you could see that that project was getting some traction. There is going to be this Bitcoin space heaters, for instance. So this is a seasonal product. It's going to work more during the winter than it works obviously during the summer, but it's a way to get I'll say outside of the actual mining cycles, detach yourself and have like more. And again, it's where my roots are, where I'm positioned, is I'm going where the plebs are. So I'm not attaching myself, to those large players that are more keen to drop when the market drops.
That's interesting. And speaking about this dynamic in the Bitcoin price volatility and events such as the halving, bear markets, bull markets, and so on. So you spoke about it that you do face in the last bear market that those big mining facilities were no longer your customer because they can no longer afford to repair the devices. They need to sell off for something else. So how does this dynamic in the market changes or affect the demand for your mining hosting service? You already spoke about it that most of your customers don't care because they just want to have a Bitcoin mining device somewhere plugged in. But I bet that you do see some effect in the demand of your mining service.
So Really and truly, on the mining hosting, it's not something that ever got. I always add more demand than I can fulfill. So it really never was an issue for me. The actual issue I have with hosting is getting more energy to be able to service everybody
It's a
that's
good
asking.
issue.
Yeah, so it's a good issue, but one definite mistake we did was to believe the process in Quebec, where you do that, going back to that regulatory process, that Régie de l'Énergie, we put a lot of energy into trying to educate them, and we'll still do, because if not us, who will? But we've put maybe a bit too much hope on deblocking there, and getting to something, and making them see what we would see, and it's just not the way it is. So we turn to private energy, and that's where our focus is going to be going forward, because when you work with privates, they like they want you to they want you to buy that energy, right? So that definitely will change. And just repeat that question again for me, because I'm sure I had another lead.
So the question was, how do you act, or how do you feel like a dynamic of the Bitcoin pricing and the overall market,
mm.
despite the fact if we are in a bull or in a bear market, what kind of effect do you see on the demand of your hosting service?
Yeah. So again, the hosting not too much, but one thing it made me think of, and it might answer the question a bit, where I actually felt a lot of disturbances in my ASIC repairs, right? And one of
Hmm.
the service we put in place as an answer to that, and it was quite successful actually, is the Ash No Cash program. So our Ash No Cash program is essentially, you would send us an amount of units, and we'd send back half of that amount of units. For a while it was half. The ratio changes obviously depending on the dynamic, but during that time it was 1 for 1. So essentially, you ship me 100 S17 to fix, I ship you 50 back, and I keep the other 50 as a payment. So as my mindset there was to be able to source hardware for cheap that allows me to turn into space heaters and stuff like that, and S17s, which are profitable when you play with the efficiency, like we touched on also previously, and to offer something to because I think the mining institutions, again, like I said, their model is based on buying new hardware and having those statements for their shareholders. So what I think is, instead of telling your shareholders that you've spent that much money into repairs, which is not super sexy, well, you can tell them that you've bought the latest hardware instead. So stop wasting your money on just fixing your hardware, which anyways they wouldn't do because it wasn't profitable. And instead, whenever you can raise capital, use it to buy new hardware, right?
Interesting.
So yeah, so it maximizes the returns for them, and it allows us to recycle units essentially for cheap.
That's a totally interesting topic, and I do love the fact, like, having this opportunity, instead of taking any actual payment for doing the repairs, like, you do give those 50% of those miners that you take as a payment a second life. Because I
Yeah,
do expect you to use them, repair them, and then use them on your own,
yeah,
and that's just genius, to be honest. So let's now dive in a little bit into some future outlooks. I do want to know from you, what kind of foresees do you see in the Bitcoin mining industry? Like, are you preparing for any adaptations or changes that you might feel like are coming in the next couple of years or months? I don't know.
yeah. Well, I'm super enthusiastic, especially because the first time I saw the Bitaxe, it's actually very funny because like right away I understood what it would unlock. And to me, like the Bitaxe on its own, I remember when we first like started to talk about it, there was a lot of resistance from the community, right? And there was like all those questions, and like, well, it's just one chip, it's not really relevant. But like, to me, it was really like, look, you're not seeing the big picture here. Like, we've just like, this is the key to the kingdom, right? So now that we have that, you know, well, very well, that we have the QX, we have the FlexX, ZeroX, we have the Bitax X, and I know some other projects that aren't published yet, but for instance, PCI Express kind of miners, all that sort of stuff that's gonna allow so much mining to decentralize. And remember, the company name we have is Decentral, so decentralization is really important to us. So when we're seeing stuff like that, it's really true to our roots. It's true to the community that's actually been profitable and supportive of us. So we've always been close to the plebs, and the plebs have always been, giving back to us, in the sense that I've never lost a customer in hosting. We sell all those amazing products, and we get good feedback. So this is really something that I'm very enthusiastic about, and I think it can be more of a game changer than people think it will. That aside, I think stuff like Bitcoin space heaters is also very, very like it was one of the first breakthroughs for me. If you go back to my Twitter feed, you can see in 2018. I remember I was doing some IT work for an airport, and I was just looking at the roof, and here at least it's very cold, so they have those like oven elements on the
Hmm.
roof. I was just asking them like how much does that consume, and you have one element consuming like 5 kilowatts on its own. I was just like, if you need that much heat, instead of just wasting it because it's resistive heating, right? So it's just so in 2018, people kept on saying Bitcoin mining is a waste. And I was just looking at that resistive ether and I was like, this is waste. It's doing
Yeah,
nothing else. It's just you're shooting electricity and making it all become waste. So you get heat from it. So
yeah.
instead, like, why don't we just produce something and reuse that heat? And it was the first like at scale time I understood like just with the heat needs we have all over the world, we could power like 4, 5, 6, 10 times the Bitcoin network. No issue there. No need for waste. No need for none of that bullshit. So yeah, Bitcoin space heaters is the first realization I made and especially when it became available for home through that sexy box. Because and hats off to Rick from Crypto Cloaks for that, because really it's something we've tried to push as a narrative, the Bitcoin space heaters, but until we had that box that made it sexy, it wasn't a seller.
Hmm.
And it's something, again, when I saw the box I understood, like right away I understood this is the way it's going to convert. This is the way, like, because it's more of selling the idea than the actual product. Is make understand. And for some reason I guess the idea is more digestible when it's looking like a space heater.
That's just brilliant. So now you dived into the section of talking about decentralization, but before we actually dive into this one, I do have a question, and this is probably a little bit sarcastic, or not really, but it puts yourself and your company into a critical light. So, how do you envision your role as a mining hosting provider evolving in the context of the broader cryptocurrency ecosystem, especially like you spoke about decentralization? Do you feel like your business model of being a hosting provider will be relevant in the future?
No, the answer is no. I think hosting over the time, and it's my goal over the time to make it unprofitable. And again, you can see some of my statements, like very early on, like when I started hosting, I actually ran the numbers. I understood the diminishing returns reality of it. That's why I'm so positioning on dual purpose, and I think really that's where it's going to be. I don't know what's going to be the time frame. I don't know if it's going to be, in the next decade, in the next 5 years. Uh, but what I know and what I expect is it's going to evolve into that dual purpose, industry where you need to make those synergies to make it work.
That's a good one. Okay, fair enough. And now let's dive into this decentralization part of it, because we obviously do know, or hopefully, I do hope that the audience does know that a hosting provider obviously has some sort of a drawback, as it is a company that is a centralized point for mining operations. And with the growth of larger mining facilities and companies, maybe even public companies, as you said before, there are plenty of them. Some of them are failing. Some of them do face the diminishing returns that it takes. How do you see the balance between like the decentralization on the one side and actual centralization of Bitcoin mining with big facilities on the other hand?
Yeah, so going back to Bitcoin history, like there was some cases where pools at 50%, and the China physically the mining was centralized a lot in China for a while. Um, I think if we take some perspective and we take some distance, you can see that mining has actually been in constant decentralization tendency. It looks like from time to time there are like some centralization, right? But there's always something that's going to break it up. And I think, as you've said, it's such a big choke point that there's a chance that bureaucracy and regulation and everything breaks it up, not necessarily voluntarily, but because they have such stupid rules, and they're
Mhm.
able to they'll be able to target those larger ones first, right? So they'll I think if they want to choke the industry a bit, they'll start by going at those first where it's so easy to pinpoint and so easy to have like because also when the public is not gonna come to the defense if it's something that they don't feel related to, right? So if you shut down a 500 megawatt facility, like nobody relates to that, like fine, shut it down, whatever. But if you
Mhm.
start attacking, small and medium businesses like me, now you're starting to, to attack an entrepreneur, a family behind it, maybe, or so the dynamic I think is different, and I think just by the way the state is designed, if we see some attacks from the states, it's going to, take that form where they'll do a top from bottom kind of attack, and this will just help us decentralize the network even further, just like the China mining ban has done.
So, but with the China mining ban, for example, we did see some sort of a drawback a couple of days ago. The Chinese pool, spider pool, popped up again. So it appears to be that maybe mining is no longer banned in China. We don't know. I don't know. Maybe you
Mm.
know something more than me. But how do you see like the balance currently? Do you feel like there is a overhead on the centralized part, or do you think we do have plenty of decentralization in the mining ecosystem?
Well, no, definitely not enough. But I think we're ultimately we're on the right track. Yes, there is still mining pools, that are heavily centralized, and I'm not too aware of what's the actual situation in China. But what I'm aware of is, like I've said, it's much more there's much more layers to it than what the news will make you think of it, right? So you can have that central, directive coming from the top of the government, but it doesn't mean that there are some layers in the government that are not, maybe dependent or at least profiting from Bitcoin mining. So you have all of that, playing together. And yes, it's a communist regime, but even then, you have to, you know, um, uh, be popular. You have to how to say that you still have to please to the people and to the other layers of the government you're working with. So even Xi Jinping has to to find solutions that will keep people happy, and in a context where the economy is not doing so good, where I know there are some like ghost cities, and those ghost cities have energy that they're not doing nothing with it. I think it's a context where it's incentivizing for installing mining to capture some value at least, and it's a easy way, right, to capture energy surpluses. It's one of the easiest way. So that and just like I said, all the stranded gas, all the methane, you have that all over the world. You have that in Middle East, you have that in Canada, you have that in the US, all over the world, right? So I think there's so many different jurisdiction that have different incentives to get involved in mining, and that's not even touching on the actual nations themselves looking into getting into Bitcoin. The actual states, which it's been said that they would. I'm not personally aware of anything like that, but I wouldn't see, like, for instance, here I would see, definitely I would see Hydro Quebec be able to make new projects and mine themselves. Why would they need a business necessarily to come and do that grid stabilization? They could do it themselves, and it could be a way for the government to be involved in mining and have I think what would be a safety stash, I'd say, because if some layers of the government starts to see that the currency they're using, or at least the assets they're owning, are not doing what they're supposed to, they might start to look into alternatives. So yeah, there's so many layers to that. And just looking at the China's situation gives a good hint on that. You see, it's technically banned, but there's like at least I think it was like last time I checked something like 5 or 6% of the network that was estimated to be still located there.
Yeah, that's quite interesting. All right, I want to sum everything up, and I do. Before I do that, I do have one last question for you that I
Mhm.
do think will conclude everything into a position, I believe. So let's talk for on the last question about the environmental impact and a little bit of the sustainability part here, because obviously, whenever we talk about big mining facilities and you as a hosting provider are a facility with a couple of megawatts, so I don't know, like you do use a couple of energy And so, what do you tell people when they come around and tell you, "Hey, you are destroying the environment. You're doing harm to the ecosystem." What do you tell them?
Normally that would be my reaction. But yeah, so again, it's all about trying to educate them with most of what's been said in this talk. So there is, it depends on what's the angle that they're going to bring, but it's funny to me that the consumer is actually like, I'm consuming the energy, I'm consuming like electricity. It's funny to me that it's not the producer that's being looked at. Like the producer is actually the one that's doing the, the externality. I think it's their responsibility, to reduce the negative externalities they're having on the market. But that being said, uh, like us as a consumer, Bitcoin mining has been put so many times on the I would say podium, I think. So too many times we had to defend ourselves, and we have to ourselves come for solutions for the energy producers essentially. But I really think it's looking at the wrong thing, because what's the issue is not us consuming more energy. If you look, civilization actually is always better and more wealthy where there's more energy. So the goal to me is definitely we want to extract more energy. And if you ask me, we should be like drilling more for more oil, more gas and everything. But I do recognize that there might be, and there's a scientific consensus. I don't know exactly like what to think of it, but there is a scientific consensus that there's too much greenhouse gas. So this is considered by society as a negative externality. So agree or not, there's a market demand to reduce it. And me as a capitalist, the way I see it is fine. Let's behave like the market is asking, and let's aim to reduce those GSGs. So it's not. I don't think we'll do that by being conservative and by reducing our energy and going wishful thinking that we'll use less energy. I think is quite the contrary. I think we need to invest more and invest more energy. It means producing more energy and using a part of that new energy we're getting to research and to mitigate all the negative externalities we have. We don't have an issue with energy, we have an issue with greenhouse gas. So let's use a part of the energy and address that. The issue is not energy.
I think that's a good way to to conclude this. And now I quickly I don't have anything to add to that. Thank you for this response. I now
My
want
pleasure.
to just quickly sum everything out what we talked about today. So we dived into a little bit of the industry standards of what it takes to be a mining hosting provider, or what kind of challenges you do face. We also talked about obviously the energy, the security measures that you do need to take into place, as well as uh, regulation issues that you might face, or issues with like cost structures and pricing. And in the end, we got into the dynamic of the market and came back to like a couple of future outlooks, as well as talking about the environmental impacts and the sustainability of mining. So with that, I want to thank you for being here. I want to thank you for the opportunity of being able to interview you today. This means a lot to me, and I think the OSMU community and obviously the broader community on YouTube here, you as someone who is watching this right now, will benefit from this knowledge, so that we can spread it to more people. So I just want to say thank you, and the last word is yours.
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you for the platform. I think you're doing amazing work. I think all your educational stuff is definitely worth a watch. So if you're first viewer on the One Clue channel, please subscribe, give it a like, and go and watch all the other stuff. I think you're doing a very good job as a interviewer, and it's been a pleasure to share my insight with you. I think you had pertinent questions, and I sure hope it's gonna enlighten some minds.
All right, so then I'd say thank you to all the viewers here. And if you do have any questions, or if you want to ask Jonathan from Decentral anything else, just drop a comment down below so that we can maybe answer them in the future session. Who might know this? All right,
Sounds
thank
good.
you guys for watching,
Bye
and
bye.
see you on the next one.